Ambassador Zekthor of the Varani Confederation nervously adjusted his ceremonial robes as he approached the Galactic Council chambers, his 4 hands trembling slightly as they smoothed the intricate fabric. The emergency session had been called after what the humans euphemistically termed the Kepler Station incident. 3 days ago, a single human diplomatic attaché had somehow managed to turn a routine trade negotiation into an interstellar crisis that now threatened to destabilize the entire Outer Rim. The corridors leading to the chamber buzzed with activity. Representatives from dozens of species huddled in small groups, their voices creating a cacophony of clicks, whistles, and harmonic tones that would have been musical under different circumstances. But today, the air was thick with tension and barely contained panic. Ambassador, his aide chittered anxiously, mandibles clicking in the rapid staccato that indicated extreme stress. The human delegation has arrived. They're actually smiling. Zekthor's 4 eyes widened in alarm, each one focusing independently on different aspects of the approaching crisis. In his 40 years of diplomatic service, spanning 3 different galactic administrations, he'd learned that humans were most dangerous when they appeared happy. The last time he'd seen a human diplomat smile like that, the Regelian Empire had somehow agreed to pay reparations for a war they'd won. To this day, no one could explain how senior negotiator Patricia Williams had convinced the victorious Rigelians that their military success had actually been an elaborate practical joke that had gone too far. "How many of them?" Zekthor asked, though he dreaded the answer. "Just one, sir. The same one from Kepler Station." Inside the chamber, the assembled representatives of 63 species sat in tense silence, their various forms of anxiety creating a rainbow of bioluminescent displays, pheromone clouds, and electromagnetic field fluctuations that the chamber's environmental systems were struggling to process. At the center of the controversy sat one unremarkable human female, Rebecca Martinez, junior trade attaché, 3rd class. She was calmly reviewing notes on her tablet while representatives of 4 different species demanded her immediate extradition for crimes ranging from aggressive negotiation to economic terrorism. Her appearance was so utterly ordinary that it was almost offensive. Average height for her species, brown hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, wearing the standard-issue diplomatic uniform that every junior attaché in the galaxy wore. Nothing about her suggested the kind of person who could single-handedly reorganize the economic structure of an entire star system in the span of a 3-day trade conference. "The human will answer for her crimes," bellowed Ambassador Graxon of the hegemony, his massive frame trembling with rage. The reptilian diplomat's scales had flushed a deep crimson, and his tail thrashed behind him with enough force to dent the reinforced flooring. "She has violated 17 separate trade agreements, circumvented 4 different tariff structures, and somehow convinced our entire mining consortium to donate their equipment to a charity that didn't even exist until she created it during the lunch break." The Zilthani representative, her crystalline form refracting the chamber's lights into nervous patterns, added her own complaint. "She convinced our transportation guild to provide free shipping for 100 years. Our accountants are still trying to figure out how she made them think it was profitable." The human, Martinez, looked up from her tablet with that terrifying smile that had become legendary in diplomatic circles. Her expression was one of genuine puzzlement, as if she couldn't understand why everyone was so upset. "I prefer to think of it as creative problem-solving," she said, her voice carrying that peculiar human quality that somehow made even the most outrageous statements sound reasonable. "Everyone got what they needed, didn't they?" High Chancellor Veltar of the Galactic Council had seen this pattern before. Too many times, in fact. Her elongated fingers, each ending in a delicate sensory cluster that could detect the slightest change in atmospheric composition, traced across the surface of her personal terminal with practiced precision. The classified files materialized in holographic displays around her private office, each one a testament to what the intelligence community had begun calling the human anomaly. The data was staggering. In the 27 years since humanity had been granted full membership in the Galactic Council, human diplomats had been involved in over 300 impossible negotiations. Their success rate was 100%. Not 99.9%. 100%. Even the Kethli, with their reputation for mathematical precision, had checked and rechecked these numbers countless times. The Tau Ceti mineral rights dispute of 2387, Human negotiator David Kim had arrived at a conflict zone where 3 different species had been fighting over mining rights for over a decade. The hegemony claimed the asteroid belt by right of conquest, the Varlani insisted it belonged to them by ancient treaty, and the Zilthani had established a religious colony there first. Each side had legitimate claims, and the dispute had already cost thousands of lives. Kim had spent exactly 2 hours reviewing the case files before announcing that he had a solution. He convinced all 3 factions to stop fighting over who owned the rocks and instead focus on what they could build together. The joint terraforming project on the previously worthless moon had not only ended the conflict but created the sector's most prosperous agricultural world. The 3 species now ran it as a cooperative, with profits shared equally. The Proxima banking crisis of 2391. The financial system serving 47 worlds had been on the verge of complete collapse when human economist Elena Volkov arrived with a single briefcase and what witnesses described as an inappropriately cheerful demeanor. The crisis had been brewing for years, with competing currencies, fluctuating exchange rates, and a complex web of debt that no computer system could untangle. Volkov had walked into the emergency session of the Galactic Finance Council, listened to 3 hours of testimony about why the situation was hopeless, and then asked a simple question: what if we just started over? Her revolutionary currency system was based on something she called cooperative value generation, a concept so alien to traditional economics that it took the galaxy's best financial minds 6 months to understand it. The fact that she'd somehow become incredibly wealthy in the process was, according to her, purely coincidental. The Altar Sovereignty Secession of 2393. The Altar system had been tearing itself apart in a civil war that had raged for 15 years. The central government claimed absolute authority over the outer colonies, while the colonies demanded complete independence. Human diplomat James Murphy had been sent as a last resort, with explicit instructions to prevent the conflict from spilling over into neighboring systems. Instead, he convinced both sides to stop fighting about who was in charge and start talking about how to make decisions together. The representative democracy he'd helped them establish was still a mystery to most galactic political scientists, but the Altar system was now one of the most stable and prosperous in the galaxy. Each incident followed the same bewildering pattern. Humans would arrive, appear to bumble through negotiations with their characteristic disregard for established protocol, and somehow emerge with results that benefited everyone involved. Well, everyone except those who'd tried to exploit the situation in the first place. The Chancellor's aide, a nervous Zilthani named Pip, scuttled into the office on her 6 articulated legs, her crystalline carapace refracting the holographic displays into prismatic patterns. Your Excellency, the Security Council is demanding immediate action. The Varani are threatening to withdraw from the trade compact if the human isn't punished. The hegemony is mobilizing their fleet. And the Rigelians are, well, they're asking if they can hire her. Veltar sighed, a sound like wind through crystal chimes that somehow conveyed both exhaustion and deep concern. Pip, pull up the classified analysis from the Xenopsychology Department. Section 7 Alpha. The one marked Species Assessment. Humans, Threat Level Paradox? That's the one. Dr. Kethvar, the galaxy's leading expert in xenopsychology, had spent the better part of a decade studying the human phenomenon, and the results still kept him awake during his species' rest cycles. His species, the Kethli, were renowned for their analytical minds and had served as the Council's go-to experts on interspecies relations for over 3 centuries. Their neural architecture was specifically evolved for pattern recognition and logical analysis, making them the perfect choice for understanding alien behavior. But humans broke every model, shattered every paradigm, and somehow made it look effortless. The conference room fell silent as Dr. Kethvar activated his presentation system, his 6-fingered hands moving with practiced precision across the holographic controls. The assembled Security Council members, representatives from the galaxy's most powerful species, leaned forward in their respective seating arrangements, each adapted to their unique physiological needs. The fundamental issue, he began, his voice carrying the harmonic undertones that indicated deep concern among his people, is that humans operate on a completely different cognitive paradigm than every other known species. Where we see structure, they see suggestions. Where we see immutable laws, they see guidelines that can be bent, twisted, or completely reimagined. Where we see impossible, they see what they call an interesting challenge. He activated a series of holographic displays showing comparative neural scans, the 3-dimensional brain maps rotating slowly in the air between them. Observe the difference between a human brain and a Varlani brain when presented with the same diplomatic crisis. The Varlani shows activation in the regions associated with hierarchy, precedent, and established protocol. Exactly what we would expect from a species that has built its entire civilization on order and tradition. The display shifted to show a human brain scan, and several council members gasped audibly. The human brain shows activation in, well, everywhere. Their neural pathways light up like a stellar nursery when faced with impossible problems. But more disturbing is what happens next. He advanced to the next scan, taken moments later. Within seconds of perceiving the problem, the human brain begins forming connections between seemingly unrelated concepts. They're not just thinking about the diplomatic crisis, they're simultaneously considering historical precedents, economic implications, cultural differences, even what they call emotional factors. They process information in a way that defies our understanding of cognitive architecture. This still doesn't explain why they're so effective, grumbled General Thakmore of the Hegemony's military council, his massive claws drumming impatiently against the table's reinforced surface. My species has produced strategic minds that have conquered half the galaxy. How can these soft little creatures consistently outmaneuver us? Dr. Kethvar's expression grew even more troubled. That's where it gets truly disturbing, General. You see, humans have evolved something we've designated as constructive cognitive dissonance. They're capable of holding multiple contradictory ideas simultaneously and somehow making them work together harmoniously. They call it thinking outside the box. But our research indicates that humans don't actually perceive the box to begin with. He switched to a recording of Ambassador Martinez during the Kepler station negotiations, her image appearing life-sized in the center of the room. Watch this carefully. She's simultaneously arguing for free trade, protective tariffs, and resource sharing. According to every economic model we've developed over the past millennium, this should be impossible. These concepts are fundamentally incompatible. The recording played, showing Martinez gesturing animatedly as she spoke to representatives from multiple species. But somehow she's created a framework where all three not only coexist but actually strengthen each other. She's convinced them that competition and cooperation aren't opposites fighting for dominance. How demanded Ambassador Zekthor, his four eyes focusing intently on the display. Dr. Kethvar paused the recording, highlighting Martinez's expression, that same unnervingly confident smile that had become the subject of countless intelligence reports. She convinced them that competition and cooperation aren't opposites at all. In her words, they're dance partners. And somehow, that metaphor has become the foundation of a new economic system that's generating unprecedented prosperity for everyone involved. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Finally, Chancellor Veltar spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Doctor, are you telling us that humans can literally reshape reality through the power of metaphor? I'm telling you something far more frightening, Your Excellency. They don't reshape reality. They reveal possibilities that were always there, but which we were too limited to perceive. In the restricted archives of the Galactic Council, buried beneath layers of classification protocols and accessible only to the highest-ranking officials with level Omega clearance, lay the true reason why humans always received diplomatic immunity. Chancellor Veltar's personal biometric signature glowed briefly as the security systems scanned her retinal patterns, genetic markers, and neural activity. The massive vault doors, constructed from materials that could withstand a direct hit from a planetary bombardment system, slowly parted with a sound like distant thunder. The chamber beyond contained the most sensitive intelligence in galactic history. Holographic displays lined the walls, each one secured behind additional layers of encryption that would take the galaxy's most advanced quantum computers several centuries to crack. But none of these displays held information more dangerous than the document Veltar was about to access. Classified document, eyes only. Authorization level, Omega 7. Subject, strategic assessment of human diplomatic capabilities. Threat level, existential. Distribution, Council of 5 only. The report had been compiled after the infamous Rigel incident of 2381, when human diplomat Jonathan Blake had accidentally prevented a war by asking what the intelligence community later classified as the most dangerous question in galactic history. The investigation that followed had required the combined efforts of the galaxy's most brilliant minds from 17 different species, working in complete secrecy for over 3 years. Blake had been assigned to a routine mediation between the Rigelian Empire and the Centauri Federation over territorial disputes in the neutral zone. Both sides had been preparing for what military analysts predicted would be the bloodiest conflict in galactic history. The Rigelians had assembled a fleet of over 10,000 warships, while the Centauri had deployed their infamous planet cracker weapons. Billions of lives hung in the balance. Blake had arrived at the peace talks with his characteristic human casualness, carrying nothing but a data pad and what witnesses described as an almost offensive level of optimism. He'd spent the first day of negotiations listening to both sides present their cases, occasionally asking for clarification on seemingly minor points. The second day, he'd requested a private meeting with the military commanders from both sides. What happened in that meeting remained classified at the highest levels, but the results were unprecedented. Within 6 hours, both fleets had powered down their weapons and begun coordinating joint humanitarian missions. The territorial dispute was resolved through what became known as the Rigel Accords, establishing a framework for shared governance that had become the model for peaceful coexistence throughout the galaxy. The investigation that followed had uncovered a disturbing truth about human behavior that challenged everything the galaxy thought it knew about diplomacy, psychology, and the nature of intelligent life itself. Humans, the report stated in its executive summary, do not negotiate in the traditional sense. They do not seek advantage, compromise, or even resolution. Instead, they engage in what we can only describe as reality restructuring. They approach each negotiation with the fundamental assumption that all parties can achieve their core objectives simultaneously and then systematically work to make this assumption true. The analysis had taken 5 years to complete, involving the galaxy's best minds from 17 different species, and had consumed resources equivalent to the gross domestic product of a mid-sized star system. The conclusion was unanimous, verified through independent analysis by 3 separate research teams, and absolutely terrifying. Humans are utterly incapable of losing at diplomacy because they fundamentally refuse to accept that losing is possible. This is not mere optimism or naive idealism. This is a cognitive framework so alien to conventional thinking that it transcends traditional concepts of negotiation entirely. But the most disturbing finding was buried in Appendix C, classified even beyond the main report. The research team had conducted extensive brain scans of humans during failed negotiations, instances where their proposals had been rejected, their missions had ostensibly failed, or their objectives had been completely thwarted. The results were consistent across all subjects and completely unprecedented in the scientific literature. The humans who had failed showed the same neural patterns as those who had succeeded. Their brains registered no difference between victory and defeat. They didn't actually believe they had failed. They believed they had gathered information for the next attempt. Subject displays no neurological markers associated with failure recognition, read one particularly chilling observation. When presented with definitive evidence of diplomatic failure, human subjects consistently reframe the experience as learning or progress toward eventual success. This pattern appears to be hardwired into their cognitive architecture. The implications were staggering. Every other species in the galaxy had evolved natural mechanisms for recognizing and accepting defeat. It was a basic survival instinct that prevented wasteful conflicts and allowed for strategic withdrawal. But humans had somehow evolved beyond this limitation. They were, in essence, diplomatically immortal. 3 months after the Kepler Station incident, the Galactic Council's clandestine committee for strategic assessment made a decision that would either validate their worst fears about humanity or finally provide them with evidence that human diplomatic abilities had limits. They would conduct what the classified files euphemistically termed Project Impossibility, presenting a human diplomat with a scenario so fundamentally unsolvable that even human cognitive architecture would be forced to acknowledge defeat. The committee had spent weeks designing the perfect test case, consulting with experts from across the galaxy to create a situation that was not merely difficult, but genuinely impossible. They settled on what military strategists had long considered the galaxy's most intractable conflict: the 400-year war between the Zephyrian Collective and the crystalline hegemony. The conflict wasn't merely political or territorial, it was existential. The Zephyrians were pure energy beings who existed in a state of constant motion, their consciousness flowing like solar winds through electromagnetic fields. They fed on radiation, communicated through frequency modulation, and their entire culture was built around concepts of flow, change, and dynamic interaction. To a Zephyrian, stillness was not just uncomfortable, it was a form of death. The crystalline hegemony represented the complete opposite of everything Zephyrian. They were silicon-based life forms who existed in perfect stasis, their consciousness embedded in crystalline matrices that could remain unchanged for millennia. Their culture celebrated permanence, stability, and eternal contemplation. They communicated through harmonic resonance so subtle that even their most animated conversations sounded like gentle wind chimes to other species. The fundamental problem wasn't just cultural, it was physical. When Zephyrians and crystalline beings occupied the same space, the energy discharges from Zephyrian movement would shatter crystalline matrix structures, while the crystalline beings' stasis fields would drain Zephyrians of the kinetic energy they needed to survive. They literally couldn't coexist without one destroying the other. Previous mediation attempts had failed so spectacularly that they'd become cautionary tales in diplomatic academies across the galaxy. The most recent effort, led by the HFY's most brilliant negotiator, had resulted in both sides developing new weapons specifically designed to cause maximum suffering to their enemies. The word Zephyrian had become a curse word in 17 different crystalline dialects, while the Zephyrians had developed a philosophical concept roughly translating to the crystal curse of existence, specifically to describe their hatred of the hegemony. 3 months after the Kepler Station incident, the Galactic Council's clandestine Committee for Strategic Assessment made a decision that would either validate their worst fears about humanity or finally provide them with evidence that human diplomatic abilities had limits. They would conduct what the classified files euphemistically termed Project Impossibility, presenting a human diplomat with a scenario so fundamentally unsolvable that even human cognitive architecture would be forced to acknowledge defeat. The committee had spent weeks designing the perfect test case, consulting with experts from across the galaxy to create a situation that was not merely difficult, but genuinely impossible. They settled on what military strategists had long considered the galaxy's most intractable conflict: the 400-year war between the Zephyrian collective and the crystalline hegemony. The conflict wasn't merely political or territorial, it was existential. The Zephyrians were pure energy beings who existed in a state of constant motion, their consciousness flowing like solar winds through electromagnetic fields. They fed on radiation, communicated through frequency modulation, and their entire culture was built around concepts of flow, change, and dynamic interaction. To a Zephyrian, stillness was not just uncomfortable, it was a form of death. The crystalline hegemony represented the complete opposite of everything Zephyrian. They were silicon-based life forms who existed in perfect stasis, their consciousness embedded in crystalline matrices that could remain unchanged for millennia. Their culture celebrated permanence, stability, and eternal contemplation. They communicated through harmonic resonance so subtle that even their most animated conversations sounded like gentle wind chimes to other species. The fundamental problem wasn't just cultural, it was physical. When Zephyrians and crystalline beings occupied the same space, the energy discharges from Zephyrian movement would shatter crystalline matrix structures, while the crystalline beings' stasis fields would drain Zephyrians of the kinetic energy they needed to survive. They literally couldn't coexist without one destroying the other. Previous mediation attempts had failed so spectacularly that they'd become cautionary tales in diplomatic academies across the galaxy. The most recent effort, led by the HFY's most brilliant negotiator, had resulted in both sides developing new weapons specifically designed to cause maximum suffering to their enemies. The word Zephyrian had become a curse word in 17 different crystalline dialects, while the Zephyrians had developed a philosophical concept roughly translating to the crystal curse of existence, specifically to describe their hatred of the hegemony. Dr. Kethvar's final report to the Galactic Council contained a revelation that would forever change how the galaxy viewed humanity and, more disturbingly, how it viewed itself. The document, classified at the highest possible security levels and distributed to only 7 individuals in the entire galaxy, represented the culmination of 15 years of intensive research, involving over 200 scientists from 43 different species. The breakthrough had come during the analysis of the Rodriguez-mediated Harmony Accords. While the galaxy celebrated the end of the 400 years Zephyrian crystalline conflict, Dr. Kethvar's team had been conducting the most comprehensive xenopsychological study in galactic history. They had monitored every aspect of the negotiations: neural patterns, hormone levels, electromagnetic emissions, even quantum-level consciousness fluctuations that most species weren't aware they possessed. After years of study, thousands of hours of observation, and extensive neurological analysis across multiple species, Dr. Kethvar wrote in his opening statement, "We have discovered the fundamental secret behind human diplomatic success." The implications of this discovery are so profound that they challenge our basic understanding of intelligence, evolution, and the nature of consciousness itself. The research team had initially approached the problem from the assumption that humans possessed some form of enhanced cognitive ability, perhaps superior pattern recognition, advanced emotional intelligence, or sophisticated strategic thinking. But comprehensive testing had revealed that humans were actually below average in most traditional measures of diplomatic skill. They scored poorly on strategic thinking assessments, showed limited ability to read microexpressions in alien species, and demonstrated almost no understanding of the complex hierarchical protocols that governed galactic politics. The revelation, Dr. Kethvar continued, came when we stopped analyzing what humans could do and started analyzing what they couldn't do. Humans are the only known species that evolved primarily through cooperation rather than competition. Every other sentient species in the galaxy developed intelligence as a survival mechanism against external threats, predators, environmental disasters, resource scarcity, or competing groups. But humans developed intelligence as a tool for working together. The implications were staggering. The research team had analyzed the evolutionary history of over 300 intelligent species, and the pattern was universal: intelligence emerged as a weapon for survival. The Kethli had developed their analytical abilities to outmaneuver predators. The Varlani had evolved complex social structures to compete for limited resources. The hegemony had developed strategic thinking to dominate rival species. But humans were different. Their intelligence had evolved in an environment where cooperation was more valuable than competition, where group survival depended on the ability to find solutions that benefited everyone. Their brains were literally wired for collaborative problem-solving in a way that no other species could comprehend. The human brain, the report continued, contains neural pathways that we can only describe as cooperative cognition clusters. When faced with conflict, other species instinctively seek advantage, dominance, or, at best, acceptable compromise. Human brains immediately begin searching for what they call win-win solutions, outcomes where all parties achieve their core objectives simultaneously. But the most shocking discovery came from analyzing human failure states. The research team had studied every recorded instance of human diplomatic failure in the past 50 years, expecting to find patterns that would reveal the limitations of human cognitive architecture. Instead, they had uncovered something far more disturbing. When humans fail, Dr. Kethvar concluded, it is not because their approach is fundamentally flawed. It is because the systems they are operating within are specifically designed to prevent the kind of collaborative solutions they naturally generate. Human diplomatic failures occur only when they are constrained by rigid protocols, prevented from direct communication with all stakeholders, or operating within frameworks that assume zero-sum outcomes. The report included a single, chilling observation that had taken the research team 3 years to verify. In every case of human diplomatic failure we studied, the humans involved continued to believe that a mutually beneficial solution was possible. They did not accept failure as final. They saw it as incomplete success. The final paragraph contained a recommendation that had kept the Council of Five awake during their rest cycles for months. Any attempt to constrain human diplomatic activity poses an existential threat to galactic stability. Humans are not just unusually good at diplomacy. They represent evolution's solution to the fundamental problem of interspecies cooperation. They are what we might become if we could evolve beyond our survival instincts. But perhaps the most terrifying line in the entire report was hidden in a footnote. Further research suggests that sustained contact with human diplomatic methods may trigger similar cognitive evolution in other species. Preliminary data indicates that non-human diplomats who work closely with humans begin to exhibit similar neural patterns within 18 to 24 months of exposure. Humanity wasn't just good at diplomacy. They were contagious. Ambassador Rebecca Martinez sat in the council chambers, no longer smiling. The weight of the classified reports lay heavy in her hands, documents that detailed every secret study, every covert analysis, every fearful theory about her species that the galaxy's most powerful minds had developed over the past 2 decades. For the first time in her diplomatic career, she was genuinely angry, and that anger burned with the quiet intensity of a star about to go supernova. The chamber had fallen into an oppressive silence. Representatives from 63 species sat motionless in their various configurations of seating, standing, and hovering arrangements. The air recycling systems worked overtime to process the complex mixture of pheromones, electromagnetic emissions, and chemical signals that indicated extreme anxiety across multiple forms of life. Even the usually chattering Zilthani had gone completely still, their crystalline forms refracting the chamber's lights into nervous, fragmented patterns. "You want to know why humans always get diplomatic immunity?" Martinez said, her voice carrying the peculiar human quality that could make even the most reasonable statements sound like declarations of war. The words echoed in the vast chamber, each syllable precisely enunciated and weighted with a significance that made several counselors unconsciously lean back in their seats. She stood slowly, her movements deliberate and controlled in a way that suggested she was holding back something far more dangerous than mere words. "It's not because we're particularly skilled negotiators. It's not because we're manipulative or clever or impossibly lucky. It's not even because we've somehow evolved superior cognitive abilities." The holographic displays around the chamber flickered as her voice rose slightly, carrying harmonics that the translation systems struggled to process. "It's because we're the only species in this galaxy that actually wants everyone to win. And that terrifies you more than any weapon ever could." Chancellor Veltar found herself holding her breath, her sensory clusters detecting changes in atmospheric pressure that indicated something fundamental was shifting in the room's dynamic equilibrium. "You've built an entire galactic civilization on the assumption that resources are finite, that power is zero-sum, that someone has to lose for someone else to win," Martinez continued, pacing now with the controlled energy of a predator that had decided to stop hiding. "But humans grew up on a planet where survival meant making sure everyone in your tribe survived. We don't see scarcity, we see distribution problems. We don't see enemies. We see people who haven't figured out how to be friends yet." She picked up her tablet, scrolling through the classified files with a casual indifference that somehow made their contents seem even more damning. "The Kepler Station incident? I didn't commit economic terrorism. I asked a simple question that none of you had ever thought to ask. What if everyone gets what they actually need instead of fighting over what they think they want? And then I helped them figure out how to make it work." Martinez turned to face Ambassador Zekthor directly, her expression shifting to something that wasn't quite a smile but carried the same unsettling confidence that had become legendary in diplomatic circles. "Your mining consortium didn't donate their equipment to charity, Ambassador. They invested it in a resource-sharing cooperative that's going to triple their productivity while providing support for struggling colonies. They're not just making more profit, they're making sustainable profit that doesn't depend on someone else's loss." The Varlani ambassador's 4 eyes widened in a pattern that indicated complete cognitive overload. But the established economic models are based on artificial scarcity," Martinez finished, her voice carrying a note of something that might have been pity. "You've been playing a game where the rules say there's only one winner, so naturally you've organized your entire civilization around fighting over who gets to win. But what if the rules are wrong? What if the game itself is the problem?" She gathered her materials and headed for the exit, her footsteps echoing in the absolute silence that had fallen over the chamber. At the doors, she paused, turning back to address the assembled representatives one final time. "You give us diplomatic immunity because you know that if you don't, we'll just keep doing what we do anyway. We'll keep asking the wrong questions, keep finding solutions that shouldn't exist, keep proving that your fundamental assumptions about reality are incomplete." Her smile returned and several counselors visibly flinched. "And eventually, everyone will figure out that cooperation isn't just more ethical than competition, it's more profitable, more efficient, and more fun." As the doors closed behind her with a soft pneumatic hiss, the chamber erupted in a cacophony of heated discussion, emergency communications, and what could only be described as existential panic. But Chancellor Veltar remained quiet, staring at the empty space where the human had stood. Because she knew Martinez was right. And that knowledge was spreading through the galaxy like a virus, one successful negotiation at a time. Humans didn't just solve problems, they made everyone else realize that the problems they'd been fighting over weren't actually problems at all. They were opportunities disguised as obstacles, waiting for someone brave enough to ask the right questions. The Galactic Council's official record of the session contained no mention of Ambassador Martinez's final statements. The classified files on human diplomatic capabilities were buried even deeper in the archives. And the unofficial policy of granting humans blanket diplomatic immunity was quietly extended indefinitely. Because in the end, The galaxy's leaders understood a simple truth. Humans were not just another species to be managed or contained. They were the future of interspecies cooperation, whether anyone was ready for it or not. And the universe, it seemed, was more than ready to dance.